admit in closing on this particular bill that I, as someone who as a state legislator, worked on a complex that dealt with the largest undeveloped river in my district that went through and crossed 6 different state boundaries before it found its way to the Great Salt Lake. The idea that only the federal government can actually solve issues that happen between states or cross state boundaries is somewhat almost insulting to the idea of the states. It is maybe true that in every issue there is always some catalyst that brings it about. The issue in Florida and West Virginia to which I responded was a catalyst, but it is not the only situation that has provided the basis for this particular bill. We have a letter from the Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry, who has written in support of this bill simply because Louisiana is currently facing a similar threat from the EPA. Chamber of Commerce strongly opposes several amendments to this piece of legislation, but they also wrote that the Clean Water Act grants states the primary responsibility for protecting water quality. However, recent actions by the EPA upset and supplant this partnership with arbitrary federal power that is being exercised even over states with effective delegated regulatory programs. Individuals and firms that meet the requirements of and obtain permits from state regulators ought not to be left exposed to the enforcement whims and caprice of the federal government, which is the reality. Finally, the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture also talk about this bipartisan piece of legislation that addresses the Environmental Protection Agency's ongoing regulatory overreach, and that it allows the basis, if we pass this bill, for states and the federal government once again to be able to work together. I have stated repeatedly that one of the problems we do have with the provisions of the Clean Water Act is the concept of accountability. Where is someone allowed to kind of comprehend against what the government does when it overreaches? Let me give you one specific example, since the gentleman from Tennessee did, and it states the same concept that happens to be there. We'll call this guy Gene because that's his first name. But he was a farmer on a family farm, a sugar beet farmer, which I would remind you is a root crop. You try to have a sugar beet crop in wetlands and you come up with just rotted vegetables. But one federal bureaucrat from these agencies, driving by his property one day, seeing it flooded, declared it to be a wetland, even though the farmer said the only reason the water is there is because we have a pipe from the creek that goes over to the land. And when the farmer removed the pipe from the creek to show that the water was not natural flowing into that area, he was threatened with jail term if he actually moved that pipe one more time. Now, even though they took core samples from the Water Conservancy District that proved there was too much clay in that land to ever have any kind of water bubble up from the underground aquifers, this one bureaucrat from these agencies still maintained this was a wetland. When asked how long would it take to determine, even though the science is against him, that he is wrong in his determination, his response was, well, 6 to 7 years, because I want to go through a wet and dry cycle to see if maybe perchance water may not come up again on this person. Now, the issue and why I'm so passionate about this is because for Gene, this farm was his heritage. More importantly, it was his retirement, and it was his legacy for his kids. And what one bureaucrat, using the broad powers given under the Clean Water Act, was able to do is basically impose a takings on this person's property without ever compensating him for it, because they didn't take the land away, they just told him what he could do with it, and more importantly, because of that regulation now on his property, for what he could sell. He was able to finally unload his property at a quarter of the value that from which this one bureaucrat did not see, was able to sell his exact same lot on the exact same road with the exact same type of land. That is the unfairness that has developed with a bill that is so loosely written. 2 Supreme Court decisions have criticized the bill and implored Congress to go back there and do our jobs and to tighten it up so that you don't have conflicting strategies and conflicting patterns and conflicting rules and regulations in different parts of the country. That's what we're attempting to do here. There is a pattern of abuse. It hurts people. It is time to respect the idea that states care as much about their own states as the federal government would care about their states, and you can make the presumption they probably care more. That's why this is a good bill. And that's why this is an issue of federalism. This is going back to what the original Clean Water Act was supposed to do, to encourage and indeed control and ensure that there would be bipartisan cooperation between states and the federal government. And unfortunately, as the years have progressed, the role of the states has been diminished by arbitrary and capricious actions on the part of the federal government. That can no longer be. That is the status quo that is unacceptable. That needs to be changed. That is exactly what this bill is attempting to do. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I would like to reiterate the fairness of this structured rule and urge its adoption, as well as urging the adoption of the underlying